Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Fred Riley. I'm the executive director of Weave, the Social Fabric Project. And I'm here to talk about a topic that we're really excited to figure out some solutions for, and it's social trust. And we believe that social trust starts in neighborhoods and nowhere else. And so I'm going to talk for about maybe 15 or 20 minutes, and then I'm going to welcome a panel of local experts to talk about how they are building trust in Pittsburgh. But before I start, I always start every conversation I have with groups, and I talk about focus on the meat, right? And so you see this on your screen, and you're probably a little weirded out, and you don't know what this is about. But quick short story. And so you'll know throughout this entire time that I'm with you that I'm going to talk in the ideas of stories because it's how I deliver messages. So several years ago, I was a little younger and went on my first vacation to Puerto Rico. We got all dressed up our final night and we went to this really amazing fancy restaurant. And we didn't know what to order. So we asked a waitress to help us out. And so she says, order the whole red fish. It's really good. And so us not thinking, the fish comes out cooked, eyes and all, a whole fish. I grew up in the projects and I didn't know what to do. It had eyes on it. I didn't know how to eat this. I didn't know what was going on. And so the waitress saw this and she knew that something was wrong. And so she came over and she says, hey, eat the meat, but be careful of the bones. The meat will make you strong, but the bones can cause you to choke. And so I said that because, and I use this story before I talk, because sometimes when folks are delivering messages, we focus on the thing that we didn't like and not really the protein of it. So listen to me today. If I say something that you think is really good, focus on that meat. And if it's something you don't like, it's a bone, get rid of it, discard it. And so I always like to level set before I get started, but there's something you can find in every story. Focus on the meat and not the bones. So a little bit about me, right? So this little ashy kid grew up to be me. And I get an opportunity to lead some really important work that I feel is really moving the needle around the country. But some of the most important parts of me is the fact that I grew up in Saginaw, Michigan. I'm the middle child. I have a twin brother. And we're right in the middle child of four sisters, two older, two younger. I grew up in Saginaw, Michigan. And I think most of my life has been about the idea of trust and folks who have helped to broker trust in my life to help me to get to this point, local weavers in my community. And, you know, I work for the Aspen Institute. I'm a nerd, so I like documentaries and biographies and podcasts. I wake up every morning at 4:50 to go to the gym. I count calories. That's a little bit about me before I jump into the story. I feel like you should know who I am before I talk a little bit more about the topic. Weave, the Social Fabric Project was founded almost 3 years ago. New York Times bestselling author David Brooks came up with this idea because he felt like everybody should have a purpose in their life, and everybody does have a purpose in their life. And that he had gotten to this point in his life where he had climbed this tall mountain and he was known around the country and in some places around the world. He had sold a lot of books and he felt, as he says, empty, feel like he had nothing, he had given nothing to the world outside of words on a screen. And so he came with this idea of, how do I do this? And so when he came to the Institute, they traveled around the country in communities all around the country, and they would ask folks things like, who are the leaders in your community? Who are the folks who get things done? And everywhere they went, all these really non-assuming people who were like making the way really easy for entire groups of people, weavers. And so what David came back with was that there are people all around the country who are silently working in communities all around the country, near and far, to help solve issues, some of our most pressing issues. We call them weavers, and we feel like our role at the Aspen Institute or at Weave is to support the journey of those weavers. It's to really help resource our weavers. How do we help to inspire more weavers? And then how do we collectively amplify the voices of all our weavers around the country so that we can speak with one large voice? And that is really what Weave is about. You know, when Weave was founded, the first couple of years, we did a lot of work in highlighting the cultural problem and really the path to solving it. But over this last year, we've really figured out that our role needs to be to invest in the people who are helping to change their communities, weavers. How do we help give them resources so that they can do their jobs better in communities? And so what we've come to recognize is that people who are working in communities are typically, right, bogged down by the work that they're doing, under-resourced, exhausted, and they're typically not the folks who are seen as the leaders in the community. We know that our mission is to support them, provide access to resource, open doors for them, and inspire new generations of them. We know if we do that, that we're going to have we'll have a nation full of weavers beaming with deep, healthy connections where mutual trust and affection is standard, equity and is implicit, and all people find joy and meaning in daily life. We're hoping that our work will change relationships. We hope that we will be able to increase social trust around the country. We hope that we will change the narrative so that people recognize relationships and prioritize community over individual commitment. We also know that the systems have to change. We believe that we have to be able to support and that our funding should reflect hyper-local relationship building. And then we also know that the power structures, how we see the power in our country, also has to change. I think oftentimes you hear this narrative of that power is from the top down. But we believe that the top down is the community, and the community is the power brokers, and everybody should listen to the folks who live in community because it's where the rubber meets the road. So we have 3 strategic imperatives. And they all focus on how do you connect weavers around the country so that they can share knowledge, provide support to each other, and then advocate for lasting change. And how do we inspire a new generation of weavers? We fully recognize that young people in our country, as we think about this idea of social trust, and I'll dig into it a little more, young people have decided that they don't trust anybody. They've decided that the world is corrupt. We can trust each other, but we don't trust anyone else. And brain development says that by the time they get to the age of 26, they'll already have decided who they trust, how they trust. And if they all get to that age and have decided they don't trust, we will have lost our entire society. So we have to figure out, how do we inspire a new generation of weavers? And then how do we lift up weavers? Earlier, I talked about the idea of where the power lives. How do we begin to lift them up so that people really recognize our weavers who are working in communities as the real power brokers and the folks who should be the agenda setters for how we move our country back to this place? But what I next want to do is unpack this idea of social trust. And I think the first question is who do you trust, right? This is a question that was asked back in the 1950s and has sparked a lot of research since then. It has since proven to be one of the most interesting and important indicators of the strength and the quality of communities across the world. Social trust, in short, is the belief in honesty, integrity, and reliability of others. It's a faith in people. It is a simple enough concept to describe, but it's never really easy to figure out who trusts who and why. Social trust is between people. It said it contributes but it also contributes to a very wide range of things, including financials, growth of the stock market, democracy, stocked grocery store shelves, social integration, peace and harmony, life satisfaction, whether you're satisfied with life, and even things like suicide. In short, it's really not a good thing to live in a place where most people believe that others cannot be trusted. And what we've seen over the last several months and years is a lack of social trust in our country. And if social trust continues to decline, we should be really prepared to see more of this. But what I will tell you is there is light at the end of the tunnel. And I believe the light at the end of the tunnel are people who are working quietly in communities to change things, and they're weavers. So as we think about how do you rebuild or how do you repair trust? And so social scientists say there are a couple things that you can do. You can make sure institutions are effective and deliver real benefits for people. How do institutions who are working to serve communities serve alongside people in communities, because oftentimes institutions create these prescriptions for community, never engage the community and say, go make it work. We think if you're going to repair trust, you have to make sure they are effective and they deliver the real benefits for the people, but there's no way to know it unless you're working with the people. And then develop future leaders who work for the greater good, not for themselves. That goes back to the idea of making sure that young people, that we're helping to embed this idea through young people, young leaders who are coming through the ranks, what it means to really be a leader for the greater good and not just for themselves. And then strengthen accountability and transparency. Oftentimes we create things, we don't really tell folks what it was for. I think when we think about stuff that's happening in our community around like vaccines and all sorts of stuff, folks are up in arms because folks in marginalized communities have decided, I don't know if I trust the vaccine. I don't know if I want to get the vaccine, and folks are up in arms about it. But there's a long toward history about transparency and accountability, and folks want to know the truth before they opt in to get a vaccine. And so we have to repair some of that if we really want folks to opt in for things like that. So strengthen accountability and transparency. And then engage citizens in solving community and societal challenges. That's really the idea of what our weavers are doing. It makes no sense for folks to come in with prescriptions for a community and not really work alongside the people who live there. And so if we really want to repair trust, you will engage citizens in solving those community and societal issues. And include everyone. Oftentimes we leave people unheard when we think about what it means to build community. Everybody should have a voice in this. And then really be authentic with your commitment to how you want to repair trust or build trust with communities around the country. And then I guess one of the next questions is, where did you learn trust first? And this is me and my nieces. I have a twin brother, and those are his babies, and I loved him dearly. But my brother lives in San Diego. I've lived around the country, and when they were little, really little, I would go visit. And this idea of trust, my brother helped to broker for them. And so it took a lot of time and patience. I'd come there, they'd be around me, a little timid, wouldn't want to touch me because I'm a stranger in their eyes. And much like institutions that want to go in and serve people, people are timid to come up and really take part in what you have to offer if they don't trust you. So my brother would help to broker the trust. My brother would come up and say, this is my brother. Don't you love my brother? And as they saw my brother embrace me, they began to, oh crap. As they saw my brother show the love that he had for me, they began to warm up to the idea. It took a lot of time and a lot of patience, but now I can't keep these two away from me. And much like the relationship that I built with my nieces, that is how we have to build trust with communities around the country. And then there's Miss Faye, right? Miss Faye cut me and my brother's hair from the time we were like in elementary school through middle school. And I would say that Miss Faye is probably the biggest trust broker there is. I'll give you a little backstory. She's in Saginaw, Michigan. She's been cutting hair for like 40 or 50 years. She was the first female barber in the state of Michigan, just a really amazing lady. But I've witnessed over the years that folks will come into the barbershop. And if you've ever been to a barbershop, you know a lot happens in there. Folks are selling goods, folks are brokering, all sorts of stuff happen in the barbershop. And with one eye look at you, Miss Faye could tell you whether or not you trust the person or whether or not you could trust the person. And so I've learned how to trust people over the years through time at the barbershop, and Miss Faye giving an eye or a nod of approval for a person. And this type of trust is what weavers are doing all around the country. Weavers like Aisha Butler in Chicago, who looked out her window and saw young people throwing bricks at each other and decided that she needed to do something about it. So she and a group of people decided to buy up vacant lots in Chicago, petitioned the city so that they can buy up vacant lots. And then they turned those vacant lots into parks, meeting places, places for folks to do, for young people to do homework. Aisha saw a problem in her community. She stepped in to fix it. She's a weaver, but she's also bringing her entire community through this journey of trust. Aisha's a leader. Folks trust her. And if she says it's good, folks follow her. And that's what Aisha is doing in Chicago. And then there's local weavers like Ernest in DC, who heads the Dream Center, a center in DC where they provide service for families and youth. services like mentoring, tutoring, personal development, legal assistance, and after school activities. Folks in this community in DC trust Ernest, and they trust the folks at his center because they are trust brokers. And I think that's what most of our weavers around the country are for what they are for the communities they hail from. And then there's Mike in Houston. Mike is working on early childhood education work and is providing spaces for young people for third grade reading, after school work, and so forth. He saw a problem in his community. He stepped in to fix it, and folks really trust Mike. And so I think as we think about how do you build trust in communities, it starts with the people who live in the community, because I often think about where, when you bring a politician who's looking to run for office, and you bring them and you put them on a stage or a pulpit in a congregation, and the pastor says you can trust this person, more than likely the folks in the church are going to vote for this person, because trust is built in communities through people. And so we have to figure out, how do we get our trust brokers more resources, more support, so that they can help to build the trust in their community, which will permeate all around the country. I could talk or babble on for hours about what trust means, but it probably makes most sense for you to hear from the folks, some local leaders in Pittsburgh, or some local trust brokers in Pittsburgh who are helping to build trust. Folks like Dean Valerie Kinglock from the University of Pittsburgh, Muffy Mendoza from Brown Mamas, and Presley Gillespie from Neighborhood Allies. Okay, I got to figure out how to turn off my screen share. So sorry, guys. Boom. Okay. Good afternoon. How are you?
Hello.
You had to listen through me babbling for about 20 minutes. So I'll start with Dr. Kinglock, and I'll go to Presley and then to Muffy. Just take a couple of minutes and introduce yourself to the group that's assembled here.
Sure. I'm Valerie Kinlock. I am the Renee and Richard Goldman Dean of our School of Education and a professor here at the University of Pittsburgh. And it's just great to be here amongst such a great group of folks.
Hi, good afternoon. I am Presley Gillespie, president of Neighborhood Allies. I'm actually happy to report, Frederick, that I too have a twin brother. He is in Cleveland, Ohio, in case anybody runs into him. Not as far apart as you and your brother, thankfully. We're still as close as we were when we grew up. So I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to share a little bit about what we're doing at Neighborhood Allies. And Neighborhood Allies is a multifaceted community development intermediary that supports the people, organizations, and partnerships committed to creating and maintaining healthy neighborhoods. And we have a plethora of programs and investments, and more importantly, networks that we've built to really address, building trust, healing in our communities, understanding the trauma that our communities have faced. So I'll be excited to talk more about that after we complete the introductions.
Hey everybody, I'm Muffy Mendoza, and so much of what Frederick was talking about during his presentation is exactly what I do every day, which is running a support group and a community of Black mothers here in the city of Pittsburgh. And what we do is we basically connect moms to resources and information to help them raise happy, healthy adults. And we also just provide a community space where they can come to do everything from get advice, to vent, to find community resources, to just talk about the struggles of everyday motherhood in terms of being a Black mom in Pittsburgh. So that's what we do. I really, honestly, I'm just the person who runs the group. I can't even really take credit for necessarily all of Brown Mamas, because so much of what I do is just about allowing the moms to really take the forefront and allowing the moms to really guide the work that I do to help them to do what they need to do, which is to raise their kids.
I love that, Muffy, but I would dare to say that that's not all that you do, but we'll dig into that a little more as we go through. But before I jump into the questions, at Weave the Social Fabric Project, we like to care about the person. And so I want to start with one question, and I'll start back in the same order. What is something that brought you joy this week? And I'll say to all of the folks who are listening in, if there are questions that you have, go ahead and place them in the chat and we will get to them we will try to get to all of them at the end. So Dr. Kinloch.
All right. So what brought me joy this week? So Frederick,
you're thinking hard about what brought you joy.
I want to tell you that it's only Tuesday. Okay? So you see my feet, I'm just saying.
You got to find joy every day.
You know what? There has to be, right? And so I will say, waking up and being able to say that I have colleagues who are committed to doing the work of equity and justice, and who continue to push back and ask questions about how do we get closer to freedom as we think about educational equity. And so I can't say that there's one particular thing that has brought me joy, except for overall, holistically, being able to do this work in community with other people who are striving to do better for themselves, but for each other. And because I know that that's what I'm trying to do with other people, they motivate me, and that brings me joy.
Wow. Thank you. Presley, what about you, sir?
That's hard to follow. Really in the same vein, just realizing every day how blessed I am, waking up with a beautiful family, beautiful wife, beautiful children that are healthy, healthy given what we've all been through in the last, 12 months. I've got a 20-year-old son, so 20-year-old Black son out there trying to, find his way in America, in our community, given the isolation that we're all feeling, and he's, mentally and emotionally healthy. And then finally, to Valerie's point, the work that I do. I mean, every day I find joy and, encouragement and just, almost oxygen, being able to get up and go to work with a great team of people. I often say that we have the greatest team in Pittsburgh, notwithstanding present company. I'm sure you feel the same about your teams. But we've got 16, 17 passionate individuals every day fighting to make, the human existence better for our communities and our neighbors. So I think I can find joy in everything, but being healthy right now with a family and support system, is completely joyful.
Wow. Thank you, Presley. Muffy, what about you?
I am in the same boat as Presley. I have a 19-year-old son, and he's been driving me crazy. And yesterday we went out to lunch and we talked, and we just had a beautiful powwow between a mom and a son. And I'm grateful for those experiences. Anytime I get a chance to, because I do a lot of work, anytime I get a chance to be around my kids and really be really present with them, like that makes my week, month, year, everything. So definitely that experience that I had yesterday with my son. And then in addition to that, we have a really small team at Brown Mamas, mostly who are volunteering or working for little to no pay. And we just added 2 moms to our little baby team. So that's great because, the moms love the Pittsburgh Brown Mamas community. So when they get a chance to like work in it and do stuff around it, it makes them happy, and it makes me happy to know that, the work that I do is not about me, but it really is about the women. So that always brings me joy.
Wow. Well, just because I'm hosting this, I will say what brought me joy this week. So I sent Christmas gifts out last week. No judgment, right? So I sent Christmas gifts to my nieces and nephews around the country. And I addressed each one with doctor or lawyer, such and such. So my nephew, Christian, I put Dr. Christian Pruitt on the envelope. And so he called me to say thank you yesterday evening. He goes, but you addressed this to Dr. Christian Pruitt. And I said, well, I feel like you can be anything you want to be. So I feel like it's part of that identity development thing. So so he called back and says, do you think I can be a doctor? I said, I feel like you can be a rocket scientist. And so it just made his day that I put Dr. Chris Pruitt on a card to him. And so it brought me joy, but it's also a reminder to folks that if you call whoever into the existence, they'll live up to it. So that brought me joy this week. So I'll jump right in, and my first question is to you, Presley. So tell me a little bit about how you weave community and how does social trust show up in your current work?
Absolutely. Hey, before I start, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention I also have a daughter. I have a son.
Yeah, you're gonna get in trouble for that one. You were gonna get in trouble for that one.
Daughter, who's 24 years old, is about to finish up her master's degree in public health. An incredible woman that she's become. So I know I mentioned my son specifically, but I want everyone to know how proud I am of my daughter, Portia. So yeah, this is something that we think about every day. I think the first thing that we have to really recognize is that our communities have been traumatized. Our communities have been, lied to. If you go back for hundreds of years, our communities have been stripped of wealth. They've been stripped of power. They've been stripped of decision making. So we really have to start there. We can't just go in and just think that we're even starting from scratch. We've got to start with our work from a trauma-informed lens. And so several years ago, we really started studying, what does trauma mean in our community? What does trauma do to the psyche? What does trauma do to individuals? And first and foremost, it erodes trust. It erodes hope, in a community. And so recognizing that and acknowledging that, and also recognizing that, everyone has had a part to play in that, from government to, powerful institutions to those that provide capital and funding. Everybody has played a role in traumatizing our communities. So now we have to really reckon with, we've got to, first of all, start there. And we've got to really meet people where they're at. And so that's not, I often say you can't figure this out going to one community meeting, right? Or having a community planning session or what have you. You've really you have to be embedded in the community, and you have to really meet people where they're at. And that means showing up and listening. I mean, some things that are not rocket science, showing up and authentically listening to our communities, listening to what they say. When I showed up in Pittsburgh, I must say I was welcome. I mean, I really was. And I think, a lot of it was because when I was introduced to communities and to large groups of people, a lot of folks would ask me, what's your vision for our community? And I kept saying, it's not my vision. Really, I'm here to be a resource to help you achieve your goals. And recognizing you already have the creativity, you already have the ingenuity. What we want to do is help bring some resources. We want to help connect the dots and help you make connections and possibly new partnerships. But we want to help you achieve your dream and your vision and your aspirations, recognizing that the community knows what its needs are. Our communities know what they need. They know what they want. So really showing up in that way and recognizing that we don't have all the answers, and we certainly don't know more than our communities know. We don't know more than the people that are there every day working on the ground and living in our communities. And so we have to stop showing up as if we do. And, so that for us, that meant, creating programs and investments that really begin to shift the power and the decision-making back into the hands of our communities. That's economic power, that's social power. And so we've developed programs specifically around how do we engage our communities in a way that we build capacity and we build, because transferring knowledge is really the key to power in our communities. So when you have folks that show up that in a community meeting, fired up because of a new development, because they're concerned about gentrification, which, rightfully so, the concerns are warranted. But I think in a lot of cases, folks show up to protect rather than to contribute and benefit from what's happening. And I think sharing knowledge, demystifying a lot of it, demystifying development, sort of democratizing development, is important so that people really understand here's why, it is good to create a neighborhood that's not only diverse, but a neighborhood that can compete for residents and resources. It's all about, supply and demand. When folks get older and die and unfortunately move on out of a neighborhood, you got to be able to attract new people to a neighborhood. But that doesn't mean you forget about the identity of that neighborhood and the indigenous folks that have lived in that neighborhood. So we really just try to make sure that everything that we're doing is neighborhood people centered, and that people have the ability, the resources to make decisions about things that impact their own neighborhood. And I think that's important. And the types of investments that we do, the types of community capacity building work that we do really is centered on how do we bring power, agency, decision-making back to our communities.
Wow. Thank you, Presley. Dean, so same question, but maybe a slightly different focus. How do you weave community from within the University of Pittsburgh? And why is social trust so important for the work that you do?
Thank you for that question. I think I'll start with a few questions that guide the work that I do with colleagues.
Yeah.
And here in the School of Education at the University of Pittsburgh, I'm asking questions with my colleagues about why do we do what we do? Like, what's the purpose in what we do? What's the ultimate goal? What are we trying to prioritize? For whom? For what? And for what reason? And if we can't answer those questions, then we've got to start all over, and we've got to continue to start over until we can actually figure out answers to those questions that center community. For so long, institutions, various types of social, political, and educational institutions have in fact not benefited communities in the long sustaining ways that institutions should. If we can't be honest about that particular history that continues to materialize today, then we have nowhere to start. We've got to start with understanding the role and the responsibilities that institutions, including schools and colleges of education, play in ensuring that communities are not traumatized, and ensuring that communities have their voice because they already have a voice. And so how do we account for those perspectives and those voices and lives in communities in ways that I think across the board, many institutions have not accounted for? We've got to start there. We've got to ask questions about why we do what we do. But we have to have conversations with other people who are not in the spaces that we occupy within institutions to say, what is it that you do? What is it that you need? What is it that you want? What is it that you already have? And why is it that I might not yet account for those things? That requires a lot of work for institutions to do. And so in the School of Education, we talk explicitly about equity. We're talking about justice. And we're talking about equity and justice as connected to liberation and freedom. And that might be something that folks say, we've never done before. The point is, how do we do it? And how do we do the work differently? How do we center human lives? How do we center the histories that have in many ways been erased or have been made invisible in these larger narratives about equity, anti-racism, or justice? How do we return to the fundamental reason why I think we are all in this conversation today? And it's because we want better for all of our lives, our children, but we want better for the communities that we are supposed to be doing good work with and not on or not about. And so I think that I have to start there. I'll talk about this later in a bit, but it's this idea that when we have an opportunity to do differently, and we don't take that opportunity, we are reiterating and reproducing inequities and inequalities. When we don't take an opportunity to take a step back and to listen to what people are already saying, this is not new. We don't have to go and look somewhere for an answer because we have the answers, and we've always had the answers because people tell us in communities what they already do. It's not as if we need to remake communities into these spaces that are non-existent. They exist. And they have life, and they thrive, they survive, they make ways out of no way. So within these institutions, we have to return to some fundamental questions, but we've got to wrap those questions around answers that are staring us in the face. How are people surviving and thriving? How are people making a way when sometimes institutions get in the way? What are the social responsibilities that institutions have to play in ensuring that we are leaving communities, institutions, human lives better than when we found them? And if we don't have that commitment, there is no weaving of social trust. If we don't listen, if we don't collaborate, if we're not a collective of critical thinkers and doers and advocates and activists, human beings who are interconnected, then what's the work that we are really doing and for whom? And so those are the types of questions and conversations that I am pushed to ask colleagues in the School of Ed, and they are pushed to respond to, and we cannot answer in the ways that we've always answered. We have to have different solutions, and those solutions come from the very people who are inside of our communities, inside of our schools, the people who might be in our families, who don't make it into these institutions. What is it that we learn with and from them? And how do we stop doing work on and about people? And we actually center people in everything that we do by elevating them in this work and taking a back seat. And if we can't do that, then I have to question why we're even in conversation with each other in a school of education. So that's a kind of, I hope not problematic, but.
No, it wasn't problematic at all. I'm taking notes as you speak. That was pretty amazing. And I'll circle back around to some of those points when we get to the end. I want to give you a chance, Muffy, to answer the same question about how you're weaving community with moms and families in the program that you serve, and how is social trust showing up in the work. And I know it just from your explanation of the work that you're doing, that is exactly what you're doing. But how do you break that down for the folks who are assembled with us?
So first of all, we need to give some snaps to Dean Kinloch, because what she just said was really on point. But I would even take it a step further to begin to ask the questions, because I was writing stuff down as she was talking. But how do people build institutions? Why do people build institutions? And what institutions do they build when they are whole? So Brown Mamas is kind of we dive into that. How do you create people that know that that are whole and know that they are whole to go on to begin to build these types of institutions? Because oftentimes when we think about institutions, we're thinking about schools, we're thinking about buildings in our neighborhood, we're thinking about places where people do business, instead of thinking about family as an institution, friendship as an institution, parenting relationships as an institution. And so that's what Brown Mamas does. We focus on helping Black moms to build trust and reliability amongst each other, so then they can go out into their community and build the institutions that are a replicate of what they've already built on the inside. And I also wrote down that at its core, Brown Mamas is a servitude-based institution. And we are a community association. We are an organization that basically figures out what is the pulse of Black moms, and then we go about doing the work that they need us to do. And that is extremely important, because I feel like we are currently in a space where we know that the institutions that are kind of on this higher end of the hierarchical structure of America do not trust Black people, do not trust oppressed people. But the reality is that how I built my social trust, which is what our organization is built on, was by trusting people. Because when you trust people, what you do is you give people the option to fail. And so much, Brown Mamas is a community that has ebbs and flows constantly. Sometimes we have a lot going on, sometimes we have nothing going on. Because one thing that I'm very, very committed to is giving the mothers what they ask for and what they're willing to work for. Because you have to trust people enough to allow them to fail, to allow them to produce an outcome that is of their own doing. Because in failure comes success. That's how you kind of figure out what types of institutions your community needs. You try something, it works, and you're like, oh, we need more of this. How do we build around it? Or you try something and it doesn't work. And then you're like, we can't do that anymore. We're not going to do that. So we need what Brown Mamas, I hope in the future is an example for is what happens when you really trust the population of people that live in a community to do the work that they need to be done. Because that's really the essence of building institution, is really figuring out, honestly, what does the essence need to be? And that's why we have so many institutions in Black communities in particular that feel alien, that feel unorganic, is because they're not being built by the people. And Brown Mamas is just committed to being an organization that is built by the people. For whatever it ends up becoming and whatever it is right now, it's going to be built by the people who need it or decide that they don't need it, however that goes. But yeah.
If I could, that was incredible. If you don't mind, if I could just.
I don't mind. Go ahead.
And say one thing, you know, both, you know, Dean and Muffy, incredible. I'm just like in awe of you guys. I want to circle back and talk to you afterwards, but you know, I don't think when you mention outcomes and what have you, you know, we spend so much time focused on outcomes, you know, focused on, you know, the logic models, focused on the things that our investors and our funders, you know, want to see. But I think really building trust is about the process. And we don't spend enough time really talking about the process and how important the process of community engagement really is. And really looking at that process as an outcome. You know, we focus on, okay, what did you accomplish? Well, just bringing people together to work together and sustain them and sustain their interest, you know, for longer than a month or 2 months. That is an outcome. And I think we just spend so much time focused on outcomes in the traditional sense. We need to focus more attention on the process of building trust and community engagement. And the outcome of that is hope. And so I just felt compelled to mention that because who's funding it? Who's funding building trust? That sounds like hyperbole to many folks, especially in the funding community. So these are things that we need to raise capital for, and we need to spend much more time focused on the process.
And I just thought to myself, of course, Pittsburgh Brown Mamas, one of the ways we stay afloat is through grant funding. And I've never seen a question on a grant application or, you know, when you have to do that end of grant review about failure. How did you fail? In what ways did this failure help you to learn more about your community, about this project, about this organization? Because so much of growth is in how you fail and learning from your failure, and then also beginning to see the ways in which failing has actually propelled you, because so much of success is based on how you pick yourself up after a failure. So yeah, absolutely. That was something I didn't think about actually until Dr. Dean Kinlock started talking. So
yeah.
No, I mean, you all are just, I'm sorry, Frederick, but you all are just like dropping it. And I'm sitting here like, oh my gosh, this is great, because what you both just said, Presley and Muffy, is about, like, we don't understand failure as part of integrity and dignity. Yes. It's like, I have to be willing to fail in order to get it right, or in order to get it done differently. But I also have to extend grace to people, because we're human and we're going to fail. And failure is not the end. Failure is not this abysmal, terrible, I can never get back up. Failure is connected to trust, but it's also connected to integrity and dignity and having grace extended from one person back to the next. And if we're not talking about failure, we're not talking about social trust and change. How are we going to change if we're not willing to fail and then get back up again and do it again differently?
Right.
That's true. I have a 20-year-old godson in college, and I tell him, give me the full truth, right? Don't give me a sweet lie. Give me the full truth, because the truth in the failure is that you can figure out how to do better the next time. But even in this grant process, we teach people, organizations, to lie so we can get more money. And that is what ultimately happens. So I want to Muffy, you talked about unheard voices in the middle of your response, and so tell me about how or why capturing those voices is important as it relates to increasing social trust.
So I'll take a line from Frederick and just tell a quick story. So it was really interesting in 2019, before the pandemic, we were able to hold our second annual Brown Mama Monologue. So we do this Brown Mama Monologue show where we have moms take the stage. We work with them for 6 months, and then they have a unique story that they want to tell about being a Black mom in America, and then we put them on stage. And we had our showcase and it was awesome. We had 10 moms tell their stories. And this white man comes up to me afterwards and he's like, I live in Youngstown, Ohio, and you need to bring this story to Youngstown, Ohio. You need to bring all these moms to Youngstown, Ohio. And afterwards, I connected with him and he started telling me a story about his mother and how one of the women on stage had just basically personified his mother's story and how he didn't know that Black women were having the same experience. And so I think that the bottom line with storytelling is it's very difficult for bias to survive storytelling because auditory learning is something that when it's happening, unlike TV, you have to sit there and envelope yourself in somebody's story. You're almost forced to find points of connection and points of commonality when you hear somebody's story in order to truly engulf yourself in it. And so I think what happens when you hear stories that aren't told is it just forces the mind to find ways to connect. And that is superbly and supremely valuable in our community because at the end of the day, we're only as good as the people we know and the experiences that we have. You're extremely limited when you forego experiences that could be beneficial to you. So I think, hearing in terms of social trust, honestly, storytelling probably is really the only way to gain social trust because it forces transparency, and when you're transparent, it's like Brene Brown with her whole movement around vulnerability. Being transparent is also being vulnerable. And when you're vulnerable and the emotions become involved and then the mental becomes involved, it's almost like a full body experience to hear someone's story. And so it just forces you to then to know that person beyond the surface level.
Wow. Thank you, Muffy. Personally, how do you feel social trust can be increased through recognizing the needs, voices, and lived experience of the most vulnerable neighborhoods? I'll tell you, I grew up in a most vulnerable neighborhood and nobody ever asked us what we thought about anything, right? Mm-hmm. And I think at some point, if somebody would have just asked, like, what do you really need? It would have meant the whole world of a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, some of the things that we think about is, again, the way we show up and, understanding what the vision of that community is, a big part of our mission is to move people up the economic and socioeconomic ladder. We fully believe that a lot of the challenges that we face as a community is, economic challenges. They've been completely unveiled through COVID and all of the civil racial unrest. The disproportionate number of people dying from COVID. Disproportionately Black and brown and low income communities. So a lot of it is really how do we go into a community and certainly help understand what those economic challenges are and help and again while building trust and engaging communities. Help people move themselves and their families up the economic ladder. And so a lot of the things that we do are around how do we move, Black and brown and low-income Pittsburghers up the socioeconomic ladder. And one thing I'm excited to say is we're partnering with Pitt on a number of fronts, one of which is the Community Engagement Center in the Hill District, led by shout out to Kirk Holbrook, and we're building a digital inclusion center in the Hill, working on making sure that You know, if you want a middle income job, you've got to have digital skills. 82% of middle income jobs will require digital skills. And people have an interest but how do we demystify it? How do we demystify and make digital literacy fun? How do we make it exciting? So we're working with the Community Engagement Center of Pitt in the Hill District. We've already offered 13 different courses that are fun, that are engaging, that are accessible for community members. And again, they've really told us that those are the things they need, and we know that that's what it's going to take to make sure that we are creating future-proof jobs, that we are able to make sure that our residents have access to the jobs and to move up the economic ladder. So I think a part of it is absolutely listening, but also recognizing what is it going to take to move our community forward, socioeconomically. And so even in Homewood, the Community Engagement Center just last week led, with Darren Ellerby, led a pretty much all Black panel around, how do we do this work? How do we engage our communities? And so, we're actually partnering with Pitt on a number of fronts. But again, understanding and listening to communities, what they're telling us, what the needs are. We're not telling them their needs. We didn't make it up that they need these things. We're listening and we're trying to really pair those resources, pair those partnerships in the community and meeting the communities where they're at. But again, ultimately, we know that, many of the challenges that we face continue to, poverty, jobs, how long and how well people live in communities, tie back to economic and tie back to socioeconomic. So again, it's about listening, but also, bringing the resources to support people where they're at to drive our community forward and drive change.
Perfect. Thank you, Presley. Dean, a lot of our work at Weave centers around how do we amplify stories and voices of people. And so how can you increase social trust by amplifying voices and stories of communities unheard, but also do it without further damaging, right? I think sometimes we do it and we further traumatize communities. So how do you give advice on that?
We have to be in relation with other people. Like how can we enter into any space thinking that we're going to improve the space or provide opportunities to people when we're not in right relation with people? Like we have to be in right relation. And I know that sounds easy, but it's not. We have got to be able to listen. And I know Muffy and Presley have already said listening as core to all this work. Listening is core to everything. If we're going to develop authentic, serious relationships with people, then we've got to be able to put our interest aside. We've got to enter into partnerships with other people. We've got to be able to listen to what they have already told us that they want and need and what they want from us. And I think that we think that's hard to do, and it's not. It's really not hard to listen to people. It's not hard to suspend our own perspectives. It's not hard to sit with communities and to embrace what we don't know that other people in communities know. And I think that's the work. But if we could somehow take our ego, our interest, and ourselves out of it in order to say, what are people already saying they want and need? And do I have the resources and the will to ensure that that's what I do? I mean, it's really not that hard to do. I think about, I'm not from Pittsburgh. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina. I think about every family member who might still be in Charleston, South Carolina. I think about my 80-something-year-old mother. I think about my father who didn't graduate from high school, who died a few years ago. I think about the realities that I come from and how my realities are so interconnected to so many other people's realities, even folks I don't know. And wherever we go in the world, wherever we find ourselves, whether in institutions or in other spaces and places, like the joy of listening and understanding people's stories and who they are fundamentally changes who I am in every second that I am in relation with another person. And if we can't do that work, then, and I've already said this, if we can't do that work, we need to figure out something else that we should do where we're not causing harm and damage to people. So I think sort of bringing it together, it is about understanding who we are. It is about understanding communities. For me personally, it is about understanding why I am in this position when other people could be. And if I am in this position to make change and I am not making change, I do not need to be in this position anymore. It's like using the position that you have, using the resources that you might have at your sort of beck and call, and doing the work that's right. And that's how we amplify. That's how we elevate. That's how we build social trust. And that's how we are able to comfortably say, we could fail because we will, but we can also take a back seat and we could say, I may have contributed to this thing over here, but it's not about Valerie. It is about everyone else who already said this is what they want. And now how do we make that happen for the people who are here and the people who are not yet here and who'll be here after all of us are long gone? That's the kind of work that we need to be doing. And that's what I seek to do at the University of Pittsburgh. And frankly, anywhere I go, even if it's not at the university, that's the work we have to have in our souls and in our spirits. And if we don't, then, dot.
Yep.
I find myself sitting on the edge of my seat when I moderate conversations like this because I have so much I want to say, but I have to sit back and just moderate. So I'll just say, well said, and I'm just going to ask the next question. How about that? So, we are in one of the most deeply divided times, like on record, right? And so if we're really going to deepen connections and build trust, what are things, Presley, to you, what do you recommend folks start, stop, or continue doing at this particular time?
Wow. I think we've all already talked a little bit about, we've got to look at how we ask questions differently. We've got to shift power and control back to our communities. We've got to begin to democratize development and how development happens so folks in our communities play a meaningful role. But in terms of, what we stop doing, again, it's not, Dean Kinloch said it. We already know it's not rocket scientists. Stop showing up and telling communities, telling folks what to do, how to do their work, what they should be doing. They know what they should be doing. Stop even when we're bringing, I used to think, well, if we're bringing money or if we're bringing capital, folks will want our money, so we'll be welcome. No, it's you're not welcome until people know who you are. And you've got to stop coming into communities telling people what to do. Let's not show up and lecture folks. Let's not lecture folks. Because we have we got some smart people on the panel with PhDs, but even with advanced degrees or lots of money to bring to the table. Let's not show up and lecture folks. Let's show up and become part of the community, part of the fabric, and understand and listen to our communities as a neighbor. Come show up as a neighbor. Let's not show up and act like we have all the answers. We don't have all the answers. And in fact, the answers are already in our communities. And if we show up from that lens, we know the answers in our community. So let's not show up acting like we have the answers. Let's not show up sitting back like we're something special. I had to stop showing up all the time with suits. I had to, figure out what I got to dress. I got to dress how the community is dressing. I don't want to make people uncomfortable. I've got to set the right type of table in a community. And so really just showing up like that and not lecturing people. And let's do show up and honor and respect the good work that's already being done. The excellent work that's being done in our communities. Let's understand that there's value to that, and it's a mutual value. When I say we, I mean those of us that are, bringing capital or bringing resources. We bring value, but our community truly brings the real value. And let's do show up and honor and respect that value, both from our residents, from the community-based organizations and leaders that are working on the ground every day, in those communities, and make sure that we recognize that excellent work is already being done. So, again, stop showing up telling folks what to do. Stop showing up lecturing folks on how to do the work. Just because we have, various types of credentials, and understand that excellent work is really being done. What we have to do is help provide resources, help provide alignment, help provide, some social capital. Maybe folks just need connections to, City Hall. Maybe they just need connections to universities. Maybe they need connections to other entities. Let's help make those connections. But, coming, showing up, we know the answer, lecturing folks with we all do the presentations and we all do the PowerPoints. But let's show up and keep it real. I mean, our folks are the time is now. The time is now. Those things don't work. We've already seen that. And we want to really bring communities to a new sense of I say hope is really the oxygen of our democracy. And without trust, you cannot have hope in a community, right? If folks do not trust folks like, any of us that are coming and working in communities, you will not have that hope. So, think about new questions, different questions. I heard somebody say an example not too long ago, Angela Blanchard from Texas. When you show up and you start telling people, what to do, it's kind of like somebody showing up for dinner at your house and start telling you how to redecorate your house. We can't tell people how to redecorate their communities.
Yeah.
You got to stop.
Presley, I don't want to cut you off, but I want to make sure I can get to the dean and also get to Muffy in school because I don't want to run out of time, but that's perfect. So Dean, same question to you, start, stop, or continue, but just take one of those and address one of those.
All right, so I'll just say really quickly, kind of a combination of all of those things, right? Start with what we already know, because, and let me just give a quick example. Trying to figure out a different way of saying this, but I don't have a different way of saying it, so I'm just going to say it.
Just say it.
Listen to Black folks. Listen to Indigenous peoples. Listen to peoples of color. Like, we have histories of already doing the work in communities when we were not even allowed to go into institutions as students, as educators, as a dean. When we were not allowed in, we always were doing the work in community spaces. So, while we might think we need some kind of manual that we have to write, we don't. We have the whole histories from whence people come and have been doing this work. In education, where do we start? I would say start with looking at freedom schools and the principles that govern freedom schools and community-based schools in this country, where Black folks have, taught ourselves and educated ourselves, and we have actually been doing this work. So that's where you start. That's where you go. That's not where you stop, but you build on the history as opposed to thinking we can rewrite the history or erase it. Build on the history. Think about the work that has already been done, and then figure out ways to bring those principles into every space that we occupy. And we always go back to those principles as the things that guide us. I start with poetry. I start with Black writers, particularly women writers. I think about what they've written across many, many, many hundreds of years. Like, where do we start? And I think that's where we start. If we cannot trust that history, if we can't turn to it, and if we can't study it in order to extend it, then we're always going to be starting anew when we don't have to.
Amazing. Thank you. Muffy, same question to you. Start, stop, or continue. Take one of them. I think you're on mute, Muffy. You're on mute, Muffy.
Sorry about that. I got these words from Akilah Richards, who is one of my idols, one of the people I superbly look up to. And she just said, stop convincing and start conveying. Leave your ego at the door. Too oftentimes we are like we're at the grocery store and the apples don't need advertisement because they're necessary. You have to advertise the sugary cereal because nobody really wants it anyway. So when we're doing community work, we really need to focus on just conveying who we are as people and how our skill sets will help versus trying to convince people to do what we want them to do for ulterior motives.
Wow. So we have the group assembled we have a bunch of questions that have come into the chat. So I'm going to start with one of the questions and you all jump in and answer as you see fit. So one of the questions that came in is what should organizations do to mitigate issues on social media as it pertains to trust among the populations they serve?
Can I start that one?
Yeah, go ahead.
I hate that question. And the only reason I hate it is because issues on social media just means you don't want to hear the truth. You don't want to hear the truth, so you want to sweep that under the rug. There's no mitigating the issues on social media. This is reality. All of America is showing the crazy in the front. All of America is the crazy in the front row of the theater right now, and nobody wants to deal with it. Organizations can't do anything about reality except go be a part of the conversation and then try your best to be a part of the solution rather than trying to mitigate issues on social media. That question really gets under my skin. Like, I can't. I'm going to leave that there.
I'm going to just say I always appreciate honesty. So thank you. Valerie or Presley?
Presley, go for it.
I'm not. I'm not.
Dean said, "Wait, Dean, you're not gonna touch that one? Is that what you said?"
I mean, I am one for sort of the glass half full, So I'm always of the the mindset of just try to bring solutions. I think everyone has a right, and you're right. We can't hide from the issues, and we shouldn't. But it's easy to point out the problems, but can you point out the solutions? And so that's my answer. We just need to try to, as much as we can, foster and cultivate what are the solutions in whatever medium that takes, social media, and what have you, and just continuing to dwell on the problems. Again, anybody can point out problems or ask questions, but do you have answers? And I think putting those answers on social media would be my lens.
Thanks. Dean, I have a question that came directly for you, and it says, how is the university structure encouraging this non-listening space? How can this process be dismantled?
This non-listening space. All right, so I'm not going to speak for the university. I'm going to speak just for the School of Education at the university, because that's sort of where I am. And I will say, how might the School of Education work against encouraging listening in these spaces? And I think one way is, the work that we've been doing in the last 4 years. Like, we have a new strategic plan, and that strategic plan involved every single person who wanted to be involved, connected to the School of Education: faculty, staff, alumni, students, community groups. We have a new mission vision. And the mission vision, and I start with the strategic plan and mission vision because we needed to figure out ways to listen to and with each other. And I don't know if we were doing it in the ways that I have been talking about previously, and we may have. But listening requires us to then create frameworks and institutionalize some documents, some policies, some practices that get us further beyond sort of just having a conversation instead of implementing action. And that's what we've been doing. It's like the mission vision of the School of Education is long and it's new. And it talks about how we ignite learning and how we strive for well-being for all. We talk about how we commit to educational success, justice, equity. We actually talk about innovating and agitating, disrupting inequitable educational structures. We're talking about striving for all these things. And as we do so, having grace, dignity, and integrity. All of those words are a part of our mission vision. And it's because that's the thing that we hold up to say, am I doing this today, yesterday, next week? If I am, then how do I do it better? If I'm not, I need to be held accountable. And I, being Valerie and everyone else in the school, when we can do that work collaboratively, then we can actually create spaces where we're listening and engaging in action. But without a guide, without that framing, then folks are left to do what we've always probably done, which is not at the benefit of the people who need us to do this work. And so that's how I can answer the question from a School of Ed perspective. And then we rewrite documents. Our governance document is new. Our bylaws are new. Our strategic plan is new. And then we renovated the whole School of Ed space on the 5th floor. Then we decided to reorganize the school because now we need to ensure equity and justice is a part of everything that we do. You listen to what people say they want, and you work really hard to ensure that we create spaces where people can hear each other and we implement that action. Without that action piece, we can talk every day, all day, but we got to move to action.
Thank you.
And let me just say, it's not like everyone's going to like it. But are we in this work because we want people to like us? I'm in this work because I want to leave this space and this place better for people who will come after I'm gone. And if that's not how we're committing to doing the work, I'm not in it for a contest. I'm in it for sustainability when it comes to equity and justice.
Thank you. So this question is from Muffy and Presley. What are some of the ways or a couple of ways you feel people can lean in and be restorative of their community?
Wow. I think there's something that dawns on me as we think about spaces and it dawns on me when we think about social media, and all, as well as really lifting the voices of people. And that is, a neighborhood branding campaign that we did in Homewood. Shout out to the homewoodexperience.com. If anybody hasn't seen it yet, please go on to the homewoodexperience.com, which is a full community branding campaign to really lift up the community of Homewood and all that it has to offer as an African American neighborhood and a destination. And this was something that we partnered with Soleil Branding, Pittsburgh, Pyramid, PGH, Neighborhood Allies, the Community Development Collaborative in Homewood. I hope I'm not leaving somebody out. And funded by the Richard King Mellon Foundation, where we basically brought the community together to brand its community, from art to culture to young poets to musicians, and gave them the space to really lift up their voices in what the Homewood community has to offer. This has been one of the most exciting things that we've done as an organization, to lift the voices in the community, to celebrate neighborhood pride and the image of the community. And I would say it has been restorative, because now people are, voices are heard that haven't been heard before. They're able to talk about the pride that they have in living in that community, especially people that have grown up in the community. Shout out to one of our colleagues, Demi Kolke, that's been at the forefront of leading that effort. That's a way to do it. I mean, give people an opportunity and resources to really talk about why they love their community and why they're there and what it means to them. That's a way to do it. The homewoodexperience.com, absolutely phenomenal.
I would just add to that, committing to the child-parent relationship again. Really committing to putting resources around the development of better relationships between mothers, fathers, and their children. Because I think a lot of times, like I said, I'll go back to that again. When we talk about institutions, when we talk about communities, we forget about the people who are making up those communities. And I always remind people, you can't expect a mom to get her child to school on time every day if she doesn't have a washer and dryer. if she doesn't have some of those bare basic needs that every person needs. And I think oftentimes we're putting the cart before the horse when we're talking about restoring communities, and we're forgetting about the most important people in the room, which are the parents. If mom is not okay, if dad is not okay, there is no way possible that we're going to raise children who can be okay. We have to begin to encourage Black women to take care of themselves. This whole movement around self-care is vital, because I don't think that we realize the degree to which Black women and men do not take care of ourselves. We don't take care of our health. We don't take care of our emotions. We don't take care of our minds. And so we really need to begin to think about restoration from the inside out versus being this outside thing that we do in communities, and we don't do anything to help the people that are living in the community every single day. So I would say start with mom, dad, and child. And if we can work from that space, then we can really begin to allow these people who live in these communities, myself included, to build the institutions that are needed and necessary.
Wow. So couple of questions about collaboration. So what are some ways you feel individuals and community institutions can work together to seize this moment, rebuild social trust, and help weave America's social fabric? Any one of you can jump in and answer that.
I mean, like I've said, the time is now for us to really usher in the promise of equity, as Dr. Kinloch has talked about. I mean, and we've done the same thing. We've really embedded equity within our organization and outside of our organization. We need to be bolder. We need to come to the table with bold, ambitious, urgent actions to really move folks, like I said, up the socioeconomic ladder. That comes back to what Muffy's talking about. Comes back to moving people out of poverty. Where they have the basic essentials to be able to live a quality of life and ultimately send their kids to college. But what I think, from a Neighborhood Allies, from our standpoint, we're really good about bringing people together, bringing people together, bringing knowledge together, bringing resources together, but most important, bringing passion together in a community. And I think when we line all those things up in a way that's organic and that's authentic, and we bring people, knowledge, passion, and resources together for people to solve challenges together. I think that is the recipe. Again, it's not rocket science, but what we've got to be willing to do, what society has to be willing to do, is relinquish power, relinquish authority, and trust that our communities can come together with resources and do the right thing and begin to really figure these things out. So I think bringing people together, showing up the right way, being authentic and meeting people where they're at and setting a table of really common ground with resources. That is the way we're going to usher in this movement of real equity and economic opportunity and prosperity.
Thanks, Presley. Valerie or Muffy?
I would definitely say, I think we have to begin to look to the children for this answer. I don't think it's an answer that we can come up with ourselves. One of the interesting things that's happened in my family is that my children's best friends live in Florida, but they talk to them every single day through the PlayStation. So I think social media being such a huge part of our communities right now, we really need to look at the ways we show up there. And not in terms of, a lot of people think about, when they think about online, they think about promoting their business. They think about having an online event so they can sell their book. They think about it that way, instead of thinking about it as a real opportunity to build a community with people you don't know and people who have different ideas and experiences than you do. So I think we really need to begin to look at social media as a way for us to almost build mini melting pots that will allow us to have multiple perspectives when we're building the community that we want to have. one of the things I always like to remind myself of is that I cannot build community for right now. You have to build community for the future. So if I want to build a Brown Mamas community, what does that need to look like, not for me as a millennial mother, but for a Gen X mother? What does it need to look like for it to be relevant to her? Because reality is my kids are getting older every day, and I'm going to outgrow this need for this experience. How do I build it for somebody who has a 1-year-old right now, or somebody who is currently pregnant, or somebody who may be pregnant, in the next 6 months to a year? So I think we really need to begin to utilize social media as a way to not only gain social trust, but also to learn about the habits, about the trends, and about the needs of the community that's going to come 10 years from now.
Wow. Thank you.
And I'll just add in, be in community with, Muffy, you just said the kids, be in community with kids and young adults and elders. It's just, last week, you asked the question when we started about what has brought us joy this week. I'll tell you what brought me joy last week was taking time out of my schedule to be interviewed by a second grader who was doing a Black History Month project. And she could have picked anyone. She could have picked August Wilson. She could have picked anyone, and he was on the list. And she decided she wanted to research me. And I was like, wait, are you sure? Second grader? Really? I don't have anything for you. But she had so much for me. And it's like, that brings me joy just to sit and listen and talk with kids and young adults, because they know so much. And if we can just be present without trying to change what they think or what they know or who they are, we can get so much farther. And then I put the elders in there because it's kind of a similar thing. When you are able to just sit in the presence of elders and to just listen and to be and to hear and to think and to feel what they tell us without trying to remake that story, it's like that folds you up, not just with joy, but with hope and inspiration. And I just think that's what we should be doing if we're after any type of partnership. We can't create anything if we're not listening to folks, but we got to include kids and young folks in that, as well as our elders.
Wow. Thank you. So closing statements. Is there anything you're burning to say you didn't get to say? Any upcoming events that you'd like to share? A minute and a half tops. Go ahead.
So I'll just share our really what we call our North Star at Neighborhood Allies. And that really is to accelerate, scale, and sustain the work of our community partners to create neighborhoods of opportunity, which means trust and hope in our communities, and move over 100,000 low-income Black and Brown Pittsburghers up the socioeconomic ladder over the next 10 years. And for us, what we believe it is many of these challenges that our communities face come back to socioeconomics. And so we believe that part of our goal has to be moving the needle on how well people live, how long they live, and their ability to actually live a high quality life. And that's what we're going to be focused on. At the same time, building trust.
Thank you, Presley. Muffy, Dean?
I would just say, it's just a piece of advice I've been giving myself lately, which is just mind your own business. Figure out what you are supposed to do in this world and do that. Don't try to conform for other people. Don't try to bring your ego into rooms where it doesn't belong. Know where you belong. Know your place in the world and live authentically according to that place. Yeah, because oftentimes I think when you do community work, you meet a lot of people who do community work but shouldn't be doing community work because they don't have a heart for people. So I think it's important that we recognize what is your role, and it's okay to have a vision that you can't bring to fruition that maybe somebody else should bring to fruition. But I know I've been telling myself lately, just mind your own business.
I'm gonna take that. Thank you. I'm minding my own business.
Muffy, I love you. I don't know if I've ever said that, so I'm putting that out there into the world.
I love you back. Mutual admiration,
Oh
definitely.
yeah, and you're doing great work. And not that I don't love you, Frederick and Presley. I mean, y'all good. Just, you know.
Thank you.
So I think what I'll say is, you know, the last part of our mission vision statement in the School of Education reads something like, we shape practice and policy. We teach with and for dignity. We think, we dream. We lead with integrity. We are the School of Education at the University of Pittsburgh. And those are words that sit with me because that's the work that we do. That's the work we all should be doing, like lead with integrity. But also, if you have integrity in your leading, then that means that you can take a back seat and you could elevate other voices and perspectives. And you don't have to be on a billboard. You don't even have to have your name on something. Just if the work is that important and if you're leading with integrity, you know, put everyone else who needs to be in the spotlight there because they're doing the work.
Amen.
And that's all I got. I just think if we could do that more, then we can get so far collectively.
Amen.
Wow. A big thank you to Valerie, Presley, and Muffy for taking time out of your schedule to really give some insightful responses that I'm almost certain some folks are going to go take back to their community so they can do some great work. So thank you for that. And thank you to everybody who logged in today to listen. Listen, I fully believe that the revolution is among us and it's starting now and is happening in communities near and far all around this great nation. And if we don't begin to listen to them and work on their behalf, we're going to get swept up in it. And so those are the final remarks. Listen, if you can, I think they're going to list all of our panelists, the websites and where you can get more information about their work in the chat. You can find work on Weave at weareweavers.org. But it's been an honor to be with you today. Thank you again to our panelists. And I'll say to a panelist that I love each of you since Valerie only shared the love to one person. But
we'll get that back later, Fred.
Your love.
Listen, thank you so much. I appreciate you all. Thank you for spending Tuesday afternoon with us. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.